Okay, I'm standing under the brightest light ever. Yeah, absolutely, I deserve it. Okay, welcome to SVG Europe Women's Scotland Innovation and Accessibility, which is our fourth fantastic event up here in Glasgow. We love it. And our fanciest venue, it's not snowing indoors. I'm Heather McLean. I'm an editor at SVG Europe, and I'm also head of SVG Europe Women. As this evening is all about accessibility, we will be giving verbal descriptions of ourselves for the recordings. This is all going to be available on demand, and also for anyone in the audience that it will help. So, in that spirit, I am average height, short, very bright blonde hair, big blue eyes, and I'm wearing a green jumpsuit that looks like I should be underneath a car working on it. Okay, so, and for those of you that don't know SVG Europe, I think most of you do, but we're an association for people working in sports broadcast media across Europe, and we hold events and do editorial and fun things like this. And SVG Europe Women is an initiative that I head up that's about creating a powerful network of women and increasing diversity and inclusion in this fantastic industry, and also creating real change and actually making things happen. And on that note, QTV, who is our fantastic partner for these events, they are actually making change up here and working and collaborating with people. And we've also got some of their current cohort of trainees filming us this evening. So give those guys a round of applause. Now, we've got a great lineup of speakers for you this evening with two panels, Tech Dichotomy, Creating Access or Shifting the Problem, and Why, What, When, How, Making Sports Production Sustainable. But before we begin, I just want to say thank you so much to QTV. It takes a lot of time and stress and investment to put on something like this for you, but it's such an important thing, and every year we get bigger and bigger and better, and it's really worth it. And huge shout out to the fantastic Lucy Lake, who you'll see shortly in our second panel. She's a complete dynamo of a woman. She's fantastic. I mean, yeah, we need more Lucys in the universe. Now, before we begin, that's enough from me, and before we hand over to our wonderful host for this evening, Alison Walker, I'd like to ask Jack McGill, boss of QTV, on stage to say a few words. Hey, there he is. Can't miss him, he's very tall.
I have one of my own. Thank you very much, Heather, for the kind words about QTV. It's great to be back here again for our fourth SVG Europe Women's event here in Glasgow. In the spirit of the theme of this evening being accessibility, I am very tall. I'm a 6'4", bald, middle-aged white man, wearing the bags under the eyes of a man who probably drank too much beer during the rugby at the weekend, but who likes to deflect from the fatigue in his face by dressing like Willy Wonka, minus the top hat. I think it's a great theme for this evening. And I am, as ever, immensely proud that QTV plays a role in sponsoring and hosting these events. I think it's very important to our employees to see that this is an important part of our company culture, and important for the wider freelance community, production and creative sector in Scotland to recognise that as well. I am, as ever, also indebted to Lucy and to Heather for the hard work that they put in bringing this event together. And I think you'll agree, those of you who've been here over the course of 4 editions of this event, that certainly in appearance, they keep getting better and better. And I hope, as you're about to find out from our panelists, in terms of the content, they also continue to get better and better. So without any further ado, I'd like to thank you all again for being here. I hope you have a really engaging evening. There is an opportunity for questions at the end. If you're too shy or you're not able to ask those in a public forum, please remember that we will be here, the panelists, members of QTV senior leadership team and staff till the end of the evening. Please don't be shy in coming up and asking your questions offline if that suits you instead. With that, I shall invite our host this evening, our moderator, broadcaster, and journalist, Alison Walker, to introduce our first panel. Thank you all.
Thank you, Jack, very much indeed. Hello, everyone, and a warm welcome from me as well. Great to be back with SVG Europe Women here in Glasgow, this time talking innovation and accessibility in live sports production. As someone who spent most of her career in sports studios and at sports soapies working with white males, apart from perhaps the makeup artist, I'm intrigued to hear what the panels have to say about how we are moving forward in this area. Do you know, the conversation is definitely getting louder, and as we'll hear, collaboration between key folk is happening, and we'll hear more about that shortly. Do you know, at least a conversation might start to happen as a result of our panel discussions tonight, and just bringing people together is really, really important. So a big thank you from me to QTV, and especially Lucy, for the support of the event itself. So as Heather said, we have two panels for you. The first, tech dichotomy, creating accessibility or shifting the problem. And then after that, we have why, what, and how. What do we do about this? Making sports production sustainably accessible. And we have a whole new panel for that. But first, the big debate in accessibility and inclusion today is that while innovation and technology is allowing more people to be active members of the sports broadcasting community, it is also excluding others. We're going to discuss if the problem of inclusion and accessibility has simply been shifted to a different front. We have a super lineup of speakers for you right at the front end of this. And when you come up, if I could ask each of you, when I come to you directly actually, to briefly describe yourself, as Heather said, so people with accessibility issues playing the on-demand video are able to get that mental picture of you. And we have the interpreters from British Sign Language as well. We did invite TAP TV Access Project to join us, but unfortunately they couldn't make it. TAP's vision is to see full inclusion in the TV industry by 2030. So let me introduce our speakers. We have Parminder Gandhu, BBC R&D Edge Group Lead, Technology Transfer and Partnership Manager. Yeah. Morag McIntosh, BBC Solution Lead for Studio Automation and Gallery Control. Anne-Louise Buick, RISE board member. RISE is an organisation dedicated to fostering diversity within broadcast and media tech sector. And you can see the empty chair. That was meant to be Charlotte Winter, IMG Head of Live Technology. She was meant to be here, but she's really unwell with an ear infection, and we will miss her, but I'm sure you agree we have three amazing panellists anyway, don't we? Give them a clap. And I'll try and get up in the seat now, shall I? Okay. And as I said, if you could introduce yourselves when I come to you, but I'll put the question to you first of all. Could you tell me a little bit, Morag and Parminder, about your experiences of where technology has had a really positive impact?
Sure, I'll go first. I'm Morag. I am a very tall Scottish lady with blonde bobbed hair, although we're all sitting down, so that evens things out a little bit. Okay, so yeah, the new technologies coming in and affecting diversity and inclusion initiatives in the industry and affecting pathways in. There's a real positive sway with some new technologies that are coming. So we've got the fact that there's a lot more information out there. I could go home tonight and I could build a chatbot in how to make multi-camera live television using ChatGPT on my dining room table. And So the barriers that were around when I was trying to get into the industry are lower than they used to be. At the same time, everyone in this room has a whole media supply chain in their back pockets. In as far as you can edit, you can create content, you can stream, you can broadcast on your mobile phone. And that comes at a time where we're seeing the rise of streaming and new platforms for content making. So the playgrounds and the places to learn are wider than they used to be, and that's having the impact where the walled garden effect of broadcasting is being broken down to some extent through new technologies.
Hello, I'm Paminda. I am of North Indian Punjabi heritage. I'm kind of tall, but not as tall as Morag. And I have a, as my mum would call it, mop of very, very, very curly hair, which is kind of my brand and identity now, I think. Sorry, you might just have to run the question by me again.
Your experiences of where technology has had a really positive impact.
Okay, from a personal perspective, prior to joining R&D, I was operational for BBC News for many, many years. And I'd really, really wanted to get out on the road. For me, that was a really big thing, that I wanted to be able to experience location work, get to travel, experience those events that only really the BBC kind of gives you access to. And for me, a barrier was always kind of the lack of portability of equipment. So I think seeing things like cellular bonding come into effect, which meant that we no longer had to worry about satellite dishes when going on location, and certainly the access to countries where perhaps bringing in a satellite dish wasn't really positively encouraged. When you think about certain political regimes, I can remember going to Zimbabwe for the elections, and we were told categorically that we couldn't bring any satellite dishes or satellite phones in. So having that opportunity to cover that story with bonded cellular connectivity solutions, I think, for me personally, was a really big thing. And also, I think just generally the internet, you know, the fact that as a woman in a very male-dominated industry, and a young woman at that time, where there were not many people who looked like me, I often felt that information was held back. So there was a lot of gatekeeping, Guardians of the Galaxy type behaviour by some of the older men that I worked with. And it was like, oh no, Paminda, you couldn't possibly learn how to plot a satellite. But actually, once the internet came in, there was no stopping me, because the information was there. And if you have the drive and the enthusiasm and the curiosity and the nerdiness, I'll take that. The world is your oyster, I think, in terms of what you can learn.
And Anne-Louise, I mean, that's music to your ears, isn't it, in terms of Rise and your background?
Absolutely. And so in the spirit of describing myself, I'm of an average height, but thankfully we're sitting down, so it's a great leveler. And I've got shoulder-length brownie auburn hair and brown eyes. Yes, it is. And this was the reason why Rise was started. About 10 years ago, our founder, Sadie Groom, and a couple of us that had been working with her for, at that point, we'd all been in the vendor side of the broadcast media technology industry for about 10 to 15 years. And it was a sausage fest. You know, it was just wall-to-wall men. And it was really, really hard, you know, just trying to be heard and to create opportunities and just really help the organizations and the people that are around us understand that equity and equality isn't owned by the only female in the room. It's owned by everybody. And so there was a real need in the industry for someone to stand up and take on the responsibility and to create a group. And it's just gone from strength to strength. And the nice thing is, it's not because there wasn't the will. It just wasn't really talked about, or there wasn't the awareness. And so one of our mentees last year, she went to her first IBC in Amsterdam, and she came running up to the Rise booth at some point during the trade show and announced she had to queue for the loos. And we've been trying to make that happen for 20 years. Because in female loos, you know how to queue. So yeah, we've still got a lot of work to do, but we have created a really strong set of programs, and we're really, really pleased with the way it's going.
So who do we feel are the people that are kind of grabbing the technology and running with it? And I guess the ones that are grabbing it, does that mean there are some left behind? Morag, what do you think?
Yeah, so I guess we're in an era now where we have the jobs market. We've got a lot of Gen Zers and late millennials who are now at a mid-range level of their career and who grew up in an era where access to digital products was prioritised. So households where the internet was always just there, and they grew up with that. And access to education systems where there was every child had a laptop, even in primary school, etc. So of course, what that means, if you grew up in an era where you were immersed in technology, of course that makes puts you at an advantage when it comes to embracing new technologies, much more so than people that really haven't had access. But it's not as simple as that, because we're talking about a broadcast industry where most people are to some extent tech savvy. It's been a really long time in broadcasting since you could get away with completely manual workflows, and you know, if you take TV directing, for example, the idea that you can, it does still exist in some specific models, but most TV galleries will see the director doing something else other than just talking, and they'll be interacting with some form of technology. So it's not as simple as to say young people are an advantage and older people or people who are more further through their career are at a disadvantage. And the same, you know, there is the same, if you flip that on its head, we are also seeing, if you think about products like ChatGPT or Google Gemini, where you can effectively learn to code and teach yourself to code, that's a great thing. It gives lots of access, new access to technology and experience for people that otherwise might not have that experience. However, what that does, the impact there is there's the breakdown of initiatives put in place to support young people to get them into tech. So where you've got initiatives to support girls to learn to code, initiatives to support children from lower income families to learn to code, people from culturally diverse communities. Those pathways and pipelines are being broken down by the fact that the value is degraded by new technologies, which mean that that skill is less valuable than it once was.
Gosh, right, you've got thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there are lots of sort of disenfranchised groups of society that we often don't talk about, and included within that group are people like young people leaving care, young offenders, single parent families, people for whom English is a second language at home. And I think it's really important when we talk about diversity and inclusion to remember that there are oftentimes bits of society that absolutely gets overlooked. It's very easy to think about gender equality, ethnic diversity, and all the others. But you know, there in the UK particularly, there is those identified groups that are not getting that digital experience in the same way. But I think it's also a double-edged sword. I think that actually all of the native digital creators that are in our homes and our friends, kids, and whoever they might be, what I found when I've worked with young people is that they don't seem to understand that what they're doing is technical. I'll just do it with this app and like it's all fine.
It's just a way of life, just the way they live.
Exactly, and so there's a disconnect between what we do as an industry and what they're doing at home. So what we absolutely need to do is kind of reach those people and make them understand that the skills that they are teaching themselves are skills that are important. Yeah, they're absolutely transferable and could ultimately mean that they get a job which isn't just like being an influencer. I don't think there's many influencers that are really
not true influence.
No,
it's become a bit ubiquitous. But age and stage, to what you're talking about, is really super important. When you think about an older generation and access to new technologies, the digital natives, people who are returning to the workplace because they've been caregivers and had to take a couple of years out to look after an elderly parent or a single parent, or all of these things. And sometimes it can be because of the type of work they do. They may be disenfranchised because they're a freelancer and they don't have a company behind them who has a budget to help them access training and education. And, individual curiosity is one thing, and I think we all should absolutely foster that as much as we can. But sometimes it comes down to something as fundamental as encouragement. And to, when you say nobody should be left behind, or are people being left behind, it's helping them recognize that, they have the opportunity, and change is scary. And maybe you just need some help and encouragement to take it on.
Is the tech literacy gap then growing? Because the pace of change with technology is scary, actually.
I don't have any statistics. I do know that there's about 8% of homes in the UK that really can't afford to have broadband. And then there is more data around who has access to desktop or laptops as opposed to only a smartphone. So I think for us as content creators, there's absolutely a conversation to be had about, as we innovate and as we create more audience experiences, are they going to be accessible on all devices to all ranges of society? So I think that's really, really important as well.
And is the way older generations work, does that still matter? Is that still important, Louise?
I think it is in this industry, because you still need the human experience, judgment, initiative, guidance, because you can't hand that off to a bot. You still have to have that, somebody making the call when they're looking at the output and saying, that's good content, because a bot isn't going to know that.
We talk a lot about experience and people's lived experience, so we can't be developing things without including everybody in that process, because everyone knows that what you learn from your mum and what you learn from your grandma are two very different things.
I mean, if you take editorial experience, as you know, Alison, good editorial experience is basically forged through walking through the fire of 1,000 busy news days. And you can't get that by talking to ChatGPT. You can't get that by going on a training course. You can only get that through living that and breathing that and doing that. Equally, if you take engineers, we've got some incredible developers earlier on in their career working for the BBC and producing products, and they're exactly the sort of people that you want doing that role. But you don't want them doing it on their own, because these are people that haven't lived broadcasting experience. So we put them with users, and we put them with experienced engineers and editorial staff to create products that do what they need to do, which is make television.
You said something really interesting when we spoke before, Morag, about younger people, that experience, they still need to know where to plug stuff in.
What about, we've touched on AI, Anne-Louise. Is that going to make some jobs disappear?
I think it might make some jobs disappear, especially if they're computer-based, desk-based jobs. But the reality is it's a tool to help streamline, help create efficiencies, some cost savings, and to really sort of have the brain focused on the quality of the work and let the machine take over the everyday, business as usual stuff. It's just there to help improve and to enhance. I don't think it's there to replace.
I think there's a lot of conversations going on right now about how AI is going to enable the mundane tasks to be taken away. So actually, if you imagine about somebody who's producing a daily news program, for example, what they really want to be doing is the creative, fun stuff, right? But a lot of their time gets wasted doing those mundane tasks. Oh, I've got to ring this person, book a line, make sure that's happening, make sure that, the signal flow path is going where it needs to go. So that will be a positive. And I think that when we look at how software is developing, so let's look at Adobe and their adoption of Firefly, for example. And I read something where it was kind of stated that So whereas Adobe was a tool for creatives, now it's a tool which has a creator within it.
Right.
So we could even argue that what that is doing is enabling people that possibly would have been excluded from some kind of design career 10 years ago can potentially now access those tools to enable them to develop and, you know, do those kinds of roles.
But I'm curious about those jobs that might be lost. Are those the kind of jobs that most women in the industry are doing? Not most women, but the women that there are in those jobs, or are there men in those roles?
I don't have a crystal ball to be able to answer that truthfully, but what I would say is this. I think that we have to really think about AI, and really we should be referring to it as machine learning, because a lot of people still are very frightened by those letters, and we're at a point now with AI where it is no longer scraping solely information which is already in existence out there. Actually, the more we all use AI, the more that circular learning loop is happening. So actually, if we can encourage more diverse people to get involved and use those tools, then in theory, that should mean that the machine learning is more representative. And I think, you know, we can't ignore the fact that deep thought, DeepSeek. Yeah, so I think that now that DeepSeek, their large language model, presumably predominantly trained within China and that population, and we might see emergence of more tech companies deciding to use more diverse language learning models to populate their.
I'm also curious, as women in the sports broadcasting industry move into more senior types of roles, and the impact of AI in that area. Anne-Louise, what do you?
I have read a stat this morning or recently that only 22% of the AI professionals globally are females, which is having an impact consciously or unconsciously on the LLM's ability to think like a female and have a female perspective. And I think, to your point, Praminda, that means when we're using it as females, the more you can teach it, the more you help it learn, you're helping it with that different perspective. Because it doesn't know unless you help it. I mean, it literally is machine learning. And I agree with you, we should be talking more about that rather than just AI. But, you know, from a jobs perspective on, you know, is it going to wipe out jobs? There was Coretta Research issued something this morning saying that the broadcasters and the end customers and the streamers and everybody else in the business that they've been talking to aren't as far down the adoption road as perhaps the vendor community, the tech vendors, to those end customers. And I think there's just a little bit of, we just don't know what we don't know yet, but we're doing some trials, we're doing some proof of concepts, but nobody's really going full steam ahead with it because we don't know the impact yet.
Tell us a little bit about the RISE Academies. What's been done there?
RISE Academy, so in addition to RISE, which is about females who are already in the industry and helping them with their career progression in a number of different programs. RISE Academy, we recognized a few years ago that the issue we have with young people, new skills, diversity coming into broadcast media technology roles actually needed to be started and talked about at schools, because we weren't seeing young people come into the universities and colleges, to the point that in England, and I'm sorry, I don't know the Scotland fact at the moment, but in England, I think there's now down to 4, possibly 3 universities that are running their broadcast engineering and operational courses this year. It's just withered away. And it's because there's no demand for it. They're businesses as well, and we get that. So in 2024, RISE Academy, the workshops that we were running around the country delivering in schools, we had over 5,000 school-aged children come through, come through the workshops. And again, they're actually, you know, making content and broadcasting themselves. They just don't see it in that way. They don't know what a broadcast workflow is. But they're having a really good time broadcasting themselves and creating content and thinking about, oh, that's how they make an F1 program. You know, you know, the Euros and seeing women's football. So we're seeing more younger females come through. We don't actually capture the data on gender of the children, so we can't give you stats on that.
What's the breakdown of
but the feeling, you know, you can see the children in the room. Yes, we're seeing more of them when they're showing more of an interest in those subjects because they're seeing it more on their TVs, like the Lionesses and, you know, the Women's Six Nations, which is a great tournament. So, yeah.
Do you think technology and the pace of technology is putting off some women from coming back into broadcasting?
I do. And I'm going to hand this over to you, but I will just say we've got an upskilling program in RISE, and it's specifically about helping women come back into broadcasting after a period of being away. And again, I will say it's not because they can't do it or they need to relearn something, because they're all capable women. It comes back to encouragement and opportunity.
Yeah, but because we could be losing out on some really good people that way.
Yeah.
I mean, I love that initiative. I think that's really exciting because I think the one thing to consider is the context of what is going on when someone has either had a career break through maternity and having children, or for whatever reason, of which there are many. And if you're at a point in your career where you are a little bit older, you may have a whole bunch of things going on surrounding your working life. So having children, having teenagers, having aging parents. If you're a woman, you might be going through the menopause. Anyone of any age who's a bit further on, anyone of any gender who's further on in their career is going to be suffering health issues that they wouldn't have had when they were younger. And all of that takes time and it takes headspace. And it puts you in a place where to try to grab hold of new tech and learn new tech, you don't have the same capacity as when you might have had Saturday afternoon off and you could go and get involved in a bit of software and figure out how it works. So I think it's all about, I mean, that initiative sounds incredible, and it's also about the industry and employers supporting people and not just giving the training, but giving the time and the space and the support to learn new technologies.
And it's also about access to that learning all the way through, not just to gear them up for coming back. It's a kind of continuing thing.
I think I would also say that there's a really important thing around the phrase, see it, be it.
Yeah.
So if we're not seeing companies encouraging those older women that are perhaps returning or implementing initiatives that encourage underrepresented groups to access that particular company or an industry, then I think that's half the problem. I think that any profession that you work in, the return to work for many women is something that's well documented as being extremely challenging. And you add menopause into the mix with that as well, where your brain's going awry and you just think, okay, that's it. I think the conversation around menopause has been really, really useful and really, really helpful in supporting women in understanding that they're not going crazy and that, you know, they are fully capable.
It's also important for men to understand it too.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not, you know, it's not something that should be discussed in the ladies' loos only. I kind of lost my train of thought there.
But your point's a good one, and then also from the younger females in the industry, you know, the mentoring program and what we're seeing. You both have been involved in that, and the impact. 137 young women mentored last year through the RISE program. It's now beyond UK, we're India, Australia, Middle East. You know.
And is that young women?
Young women coming through the program. And we have male mentors as well on our program. But what we're doing is we're creating a community that has now, so this I think is the 8th year of mentoring. I mean, now there's well over 1,000 people been through our mentoring program. It's just so valuable for them. And again, you see reoccurring themes. It's, right, I want to go for a promotion. Can you help coach me through that? How do I go about that? I want to have a conversation with my boss. How do I set that up? A lot of it is confidence. A lot of it just, you know, paying it forward and sharing your experience with a young woman who, you know, you've been that person. It's just being a bit more inclusive about it.
I think also the point that hasn't been made thus far is we're seeing a lot more diagnoses of different kinds of neurodivergencies as well, that perhaps we didn't see those kinds of numbers a few years ago. So an awareness of that is really, really important as well. And when you talk about technology and women, I think intuitively, even like a regular homemaker, who's operating the washing machine? How many households does the partner not know how to use the washing machine? Oh, how do I wash my white shirt in this? So I think we need to dispel
variation
that
on the
myth.
multi-skilling, isn't
we need
it?
to dispel that myth that women don't understand technology. I think it's a narrative that's just existed for eons, and women need to stop believing it.
Yeah. Did you ever feel that, Morag?
I mean, in my house, it's me that can't work the washing machine.
You're a techie.
You do know you just want somebody else to do it.
Yeah.
There's a YouTube for that.
I think one area that is worth touching on, though, is the advances in software and SaaS-based systems and the flexibility that brings. And as Parminder highlighted, for neurodivergent people, this flexibility where you can get, speaking as a neurodivergent person myself, I can do my job at 2 a.m. when I'm in full flow, and really getting into it and really enjoying what I'm doing. And I'm not sitting at 2 p.m. having a stress out because I can't focus on my work. And that flexibility is really powerful and really helpful. And that serves a number of groups, people with caring responsibilities. But broadcast industry is so well known for terrible long hours and antisocial shifts. And also in terms of access to work for people with disabilities, software systems where you can do your job and you can do it from pretty much anywhere and whenever. That's a real big positive step in opening up the broadcast industry to wider groups, I think.
I've got a big, long question for you, Parminder. Are you ready? As new technologies and ways of working have been instigated in companies, how are those ideas and technologies rolled out and filtered through the organisation to all these different types of people we've been talking about? How is it filtered down?
So if I can successfully answer the question that you've just given me, I've probably solved every business's change management headache ever. I think ultimately that's what it boils down to, isn't it? We've talked about AI and people worrying about that. But actually, being somebody who's been at the BBC for a really, really, really long time, the thing that I hear most often is it's the people that keep you here. So there is a responsibility amongst those companies to ensure that the change management and the way technology and new workflows are introduced, that they bring the operational staff along with that journey. I think there have been really great advancements from an operational perspective. So, you know, the development of graphical user interfaces, so making operational roles a lot more easier for people to be able to do quickly and efficiently. I think when we look at other communities that are perhaps underserved, so disabilities such as hearing loss, being vision impaired, it's like, you know what, guess what? Radio's been doing a great job for the vision impaired people for many, many, many years. And amongst the deaf community, the BBC's R&D department has done an awful lot of work around how we can enable content experiences. Because if we're talking about equality, it's about ensuring that everybody gets that same experience and that level of engagement, regardless of what their needs might be. And there's been a lot of work that's been done where actually the deaf community's been quite resistant, and what they prefer is to have somebody signing in vision. They don't really want some weird wearable. We've done some work around 360 goggles. Where do you place the subtitles in that environment where it's not a distraction?
So the peel it back, that's what's preferred, the preferred approach.
Yeah, in vision. So, I mean, it was only 1990. I say only. This is where I show my age, right? It was only 1996 where the Equality Act actually made quotas for subtitling, captioning, and audio description in TV content.
It's not that long ago, is it?
I don't think so, but I'm quite old.
OBs, sports broadcasting and OBs are still very, very challenging places for different groups, aren't they?
So we were talking about democratisation of technology as well, and I think what that has enabled really beautifully is for the kind of sporting events that possibly did not get airtime or coverage in the past, and now being able to be served. So what that kind of got me thinking was, whilst it's great that we've now got the technology to reach those smaller, lower tier sports, oftentimes those grounds are really, really old. And because they've been male dominated, they haven't thought about the things that we as women think about. We're just like, can I get to the loo quickly? Is it like miles away from the OB compound? When you've got old institutions that were not built with media presence in mind, and that has not been, thought about, I think there are still going to be problems around that. However, when we talk about software workflows, being able to minimize the amount of technology that actually needs to be at the OB, the rise of edge compute, enabling more experiences to happen closer to the point of production, and we start getting into the worlds of like extended reality and augmented reality experiences, and being able to provide the computational power through containerization, which was part of the IBC Accelerator Connect and Produce Anywhere that was last year, which is been phenomenal in terms of the work that's been done to enable that thought process to develop and push that state of the art forward.
Morag?
I mean, yes, prior to the job I'm currently in, I was a vision mixer, or still am a vision mixer, but that was how I cut my teeth in television. So I've done my time in OB trucks, and one memory to probably highlight what it can be like for a woman was when I had a newborn baby at home and was breastfeeding and found myself in the toilets in Murrayfield, freezing cold, expressing milk over my lunch break. And if I compare that to what I've seen at QTV, for example, now, where you've got these lovely stations where you can produce and create content in the comfort of an office, where there's heating and cups of tea and facilities nearby, that change could, that for a wide range of groups of people could mean access to working on in content which traditionally could only be produced by an OB truck and driving hundreds of miles to get there, and et cetera, staying overnight can now be produced, 20-minute taxi journey from your house. And actually that really does open doors to a much wider group of people to be able to make that sort of TV, I think.
So if OB trucks could be smaller and obviously operations done elsewhere, but we're still going to need OB trucks, aren't we? So how are we going to make that working environment better? How can technology help us there?
Well, for now we need OB trucks, but yeah. I mean, we're straddling two worlds at the moment. We've got the older SDI world, and that will continue for a long time yet. I mean, if you take the BBC's infrastructure, it is, of all our major sites, one is IP based. So when we talk about, if we go back to talking about the skills that we need to keep the industry afloat, all those established engineering skills founded in SDI technologies are completely relevant and will be for a very long time. Equally, we are heading towards a point, or we're heading into a future where we will look to cloud technologies, IP technologies, and I wouldn't be surprised if we get to the point where we don't need OB trucks in the future. So, yeah, I can see the value in driving a whole load of people to event to cover it, because that's how you get content. But equally, do you need the person that's racking cameras or vision mixing to be sitting in a truck outside it to make that work? I'm not sure.
And I think also with OB trucks, it's always going to be dependent on what kind of event you're covering, because if it's a tier 1 sport, you've got to guarantee resilience and opportunity for that to be as the rights people want it to be.
I know none of you have a crystal ball, but already Morag has given us a hint of the future. The way technology is going, is there anything that you can talk about that you think might happen to improve that will have a benefit to a whole load of groups?
So necessity is the mother of invention, they say, right? And we saw massive gains in the remote production world during the pandemic because it was absolutely necessary. And certainly within the BBC Edge Forum, which is a connectivity and contribution subject matter experts from across the estate of the BBC. And from within that group, where obviously we had location engineers that could not work, solutions were developed. So whether that was a virtual audience or people being able to contribute interviews in a balanced and pre-recorded situation. So I think we will keep seeing development as needs arise, but we've also got to be cognizant of the fact that there are lots of challenges in the industry at the moment. We're seeing lots of companies closing down, a lot of redundancies are being made. So, you know, how do you balance the exodus of talent with the influx of the new pipeline and also handling all of the business challenges that are currently going on?
Yep. Should we be worried about all this, Anne-Louise? What do you think?
I don't know that
final word.
I don't know that we need to be worried. I just think we need to be aware. I mean, absolutely echo everything you've just said there, Parminder. And, you know, just keep our eyes on it, because at the moment it is a period of fast change. And I think, unfortunately, there are economic, issues that are having a severe impact, and we've seen in the last couple of days particularly. So, again, but we've still got to bring in fresh talent. We've still got to nurture the talent that we've got and keep the talent that we've got and retain it in the industry. Otherwise, you know, we're just going to see a brain drain.
I think we'll have to leave it there. That's our allotted time. But we do have some time for questions if anybody has some.
I think geography is one that we don't talk about too often. We've got the Central Belt here in Scotland. Obviously, we've got the Manchester, Salford. What access to technology? How are we going to get them to get into these roles, to know they even exist?
I completely understand the challenge of being in a remote location and not having those kinds of opportunities. And there's been a lot of conversations about how young people that don't have family that can support them, if they're coming to an internship with a big company in London, for example. But what I would suggest is that I think that the democratization of technology means that, you know, there is opportunity to play, create, design what it is you're interested in, and find a way to get into that. So that might translate as, you know, a school or uni radio channel, creating content for a local Facebook page, something like that. So I think it's very easy for kids to say they want to work in the industry, but oftentimes they don't really understand what that means. They understand what they see on the screen, but what RISE does really, really well, and other initiatives across big players in the industry, is try and sort of, you know, pull back that curtain of like, do you know what? Actually, if you love sport, you might not get on screen to be a sports presenter, but hey, like, if you're an excellent cameraman, you could be there watching everything that you've dreamed of watching. So I think it's about that. I think getting the information out, groups like RISE and the academy work that happens, getting out into schools, talking to young people, and just igniting passion in them and helping them, but also understanding that technology should mean that we get to a point where geography is not a limiting factor. Ultimately, if you've got a good broadband connectivity, you can be live in streaming, right? We've seen that.
And is RISE coming to Scotland, Anne-Louise?
Absolutely, RISE is coming to Scotland. Yes, so there'll be a summer school in 2025 here in Glasgow. Going to be looking for a Scottish mentoring cohort as well, and more initiatives to come.
Good news. Thank you very much indeed, Parminder, Morag and Anne-Louise. Give them a round of applause. Well done. Could I ask our next panel just to wander up? I told you it was going to be brief, a brief interlude, and that was all of 45 seconds, so well done, everybody. So there will be lots to talk about afterwards, so if we could have your attention for this one. As we've been hearing, technology is advancing and remote production hubs are opening doors for crew that need accessibility support in order to do their job. But those Roadblocks we've mentioned continue to exist around outside broadcast trucks, stadium and more. I've so many stories about trying to find toilets at various locations. In this session, we're going to discuss how these barriers can be raised sustainably using technology and innovation, creating a lasting legacy. Plus, what has been done in the sports broadcasting industry to help achieve this right now? What's happening right now? So we have the best people here up front to get us a handle on this. And again, when I come to the speakers directly, if you could briefly describe yourselves. We have Joe Finham, Sky Sports Manager for Responsible Production, Amelia Knott, TV Industry, Human Rights Forum Lead Researcher, and Lucy Lake, QTV Director of People and Purpose. So I'll start with a question for all. What are each of you doing in your respective roles to currently accommodate accessibility needs? Joe, we'll start with you.
Hi, I'm Jo. I have short brown hair. I'm going to call it a lob.
Lob.
I identify as being white other, being British, Italian and Mauritian heritage. I'm very short, but luckily I've got short legs and a long body, so no one can tell when I'm sitting on this massive stool. And I'm wearing a very oversized shirt or jacket to cover a multitude of sins. So Sky Sports, what are we up to when it comes to accessibility? We are thinking about what our role is in our supply chain, so with working with our suppliers, RFP stage and responsible business target stage. So it's not just about winning the work, talking about all the great things that you're going to do or are doing, but it's also having those annual check-ins with the suppliers. And we're also thinking about the federations that we work with, so actually looking upwards and seeing how we can work with federations to make improvements as well. And external bodies like TAP to see what's going on externally and how we can support and work with those initiatives to try and make sure that they're relevant for the sport genre. We know that there's some incredibly impressive targets out there that we are absolutely working to, and we're encouraging all of our suppliers to work to. But we know that sport is a challenge. It was mentioned earlier, like how difficult it is. And so we are working with TAP to make sure that actually those targets are reasonable for our genre. Lots of other things, but I'm sure we'll get to them.
We will. Lucy?
Hi, yes, I'm Lucy. I'm medium height. I've got my hair up. It's a very natural blonde. Sparkly top and floofy skirt. We grab with both hands the opportunity to showcase what we do and demonstrate that what we have always wanted to do with inclusion and DEI and accessibility is actually valuable from a business sense is when we get to an RFP stage and we actually have to use what we've done as part of the RFP stage. So that makes it great, because if you've got 12 months of trying to convince your senior leadership team that it's money worth spent, and then actually you have to put it in an RFP, job done. You've done it. So that's really, really important example as to why feeding that through works really, really well for us. It is more important than ever to sit up on a platform like this and hold yourself to account to, though it is extremely difficult to prioritize this spending, we're going to try our best and do it anyway and still talk about it.
But you can still accommodate some accessibility needs that don't cost.
Yeah, you absolutely can, in terms of just making sure that you get the feedback from your freelancers, that you make sure that you've had a conversation with the venues just before an OB, making sure that you've got everything like that. But even to the point where you're going, okay, that venue doesn't have everything we need, so we're going to need Portaloos, so let's make sure we go back and talk to the client about where we're going to get the budget for that, and the budget's getting squeezed. But in terms of actually fixing some of the issues at the grounds that we were talking about, and that's just basic health and safety sometimes, that's not even accessibility. We have to be, we have to look at the where we spend on a micro level to make sure that what we're spending is actually going to return that value. So if we're going to spend in an innovative way to make sure that we retrofit our trucks to be wheelchair accessible, we're only going to do that if we know that the majority of the venues that we go to are going to be wheelchair accessible for our operator. And until we know that, that would be a huge drain on our resource and a waste of money. So it's about being clever, it's about talking to people like Amelia, it's about making sure that we know where we can spend the money reasonably.
Yeah, and Amelia, TV, I didn't even know, I don't know if anybody else knew until I chatted to you last week that there was a TV human rights forum. Tell us a little bit about it.
Okay, so before I start, I've got shoulder-length brown mousy hair, bright blue trousers, I identify as white, and I'm wearing glasses this evening. So the TV Industry Human Rights Forum was set up by 4 broadcasters, of which Sky was one, with a question about what are the human rights risks in the making of TV. So that's what I've been doing for the last nearly 6 years, is research to try and understand where there are human rights risks, and then thinking about practical ways that they can be addressed. And I try and look at the whole ecosystem, because individual companies on their own cannot address some of the problems that we're seeing. When I talk about human rights risks, the ones that are relevant to this, there is a human right to non-discrimination. There's a human right to health, which includes mental health. There's a right to life, which covers safety, and there's a right to just and favourable conditions. So as an example, one of the projects that we looked at was thinking about, wasn't just sports teams, it was also news and documentaries, but when teams of diverse individuals are deployed overseas to somewhere where an aspect of their identity might put them at risk. Now, they will often have access to security advice about how to protect yourself if you're female, if you're LGBTQ, but often that security advice isn't geared towards diverse individuals. The people giving it don't always know how to have the right conversations. So we did a project that looked at a dialogue project that looked at how to have more inclusive security practices to support diverse teams who are going to countries. And we know there is sport happening in increasingly challenging places like Qatar, like Saudi Arabia, where it can be really difficult for some individuals to feel comfortable. So that's the sort of project that we do, and then think about what are the practical approaches to improving that.
What's the kind of feedback you get from your research about some of the problems with accessibility? What is it like at the top of the list?
I mean, it's pretty broad. We don't just focus. I look at the whole range of human rights and everybody who might be affected. The things that always get me are things like basic access to toilets. And it's not just, it's sort of everybody's access as well. It's not just someone with a disability. You know, regularly security guards have no access to toilets on a 20-hour shift because they get locked out of the stadiums. And it's when we think about, you know, sometimes asking those questions for individuals with particular needs opens up a whole range of problems that actually everyone has and would benefit from better things. So I think part of what we do is, rather than sort of dive in on specifics, is also look at the ways asking some of these questions can benefit people more broadly. Same with things like wheelchair access. If you want to, you know, if you're improving wheelchair access for somebody, actually it's much better for the people moving the kit around to be able to get things through as well. You're asking questions that actually benefit a much wider group.
And that's been our response to it. Amelia came to one of our TAP meetings, and you said that exact point, and we're like, yeah, like, let's stop thinking about these venues as being really difficult to retrofit. Like, it is going to be very hard, but actually for those people with those physical requirements. But actually, let's think about that camera operator that needs to get that 60-kilogram camera lens up into that position. That is a crap job for them to do that when the hoist might be broken, when they have to go up all those steps. That's hard, and that makes their job difficult. Actually, how can we improve that? And that actually shifting that lens on things, of actually taking it from it's a physical problem for trying to get people into our industry. Actually, let's improve the industry for our people. Let's then retain our people and be seen to be more attractive to put to a wider pool.
Do you find crew are generally pretty stoic and they don't complain, or do they moan? Do they give feedback? Do they say these things, or do you have to go to them and say, you know, are you happy with this?
Yeah, it's a challenge to get the feedback, and unfortunately, we have had an industry of we get shit to air, right? So we all know that we just make sure that the production gets the air and everything works and everything that has to be done happens. And actually, it's just that continuous thing of making sure that actually let's think about what's going on, let's encourage people to feedback, let's encourage the opportunities to have reviews like Amelia's done for us on security and the rigger driver community to actually understand what the communities are going through. And let's have roles like myself and Suzanne, where we go to site, and when people hear about our roles and the fact that we want to improve the well-being of the crew on site, we get surrounded. I was at Chelsea the other day and I was surrounded by 6 camera operators trying to talk to me about what the issues are and how we can improve things. And I relish those opportunities because I can say, yes, we're working on that. Yes, we're working on that. And oh God, let's go think about that one.
That is great news but for smaller companies, it's a little more challenging.
No, I mean, it's actually the same. It's the same what we've sort of been able to do, and this speaks to what Amelia was talking about, is we've been looking at this from a much broader health and safety aspect as well as everything else. And so we do a feedback form after every event for, that's digital, for the freelancers to be able to feed back to that. You tie in the accessibility, the inclusion side of it with that feedback form. But I think it's also just really worth remembering why it is that you need to do that. And at the moment, certainly what we're seeing up here in Scotland is that we are losing operators. So the pool of talent for people who want to do the outside bit of outside broadcast, which though is potentially the footprint of which is getting smaller and smaller due to remote production, due to technology, it still exists. We're finding it harder and harder and harder to get the people who want to, week after week, do the outside bit. And we've got the old guard, we've got the stoic guys who were brought up and cut their teeth on that and are perfectly happy with it. Then they get to that age where they're like, whoa, like way too knackered for this now, and remote production exists. So I'll tell you what, you can hire me, but only for the gallery part of it. So now we're looking at, okay, we've got a desperate need to make sure that this part of the job becomes a little bit more attractive to the next generation. And we've got multiple problems with the next generation coming up wanting to do those roles. One, they're not told about them at school, university or anything. And I'm talking specifically about outside broadcast. So even if they're told about any other multi-camera or other jobs or even tech jobs within the universities, which, as you mentioned, there's maybe about 3 courses down in England. There aren't a lot of them up here that deal with outside broadcasters generally. They're still generally talking about studio work, which is indoors, it's comfortable, it's all of this, because it can be still more attractive. It can be really exciting, really interesting, really great. Huge senses of achievement. I've still got staff who much prefer going out than being in.
Yep.
But we have to make that better. So there's a need, is the point. If you remember that there's always a business need for this at the moment, because we don't have the skill, so you have to get it better.
Joe, what about Sky? What are they doing? What are you doing specifically for, say, someone like a rigger, and the working environment and the hours and everything else that goes along with being a rigger, and attracting young people to become riggers, because they're a vital part of the crew?
So, yeah, we conducted, as part of Amelia's work, we conducted a rigger review to look at the state of the industry and how we can improve things for them, knowing that there is a recruitment concern, an ageing population, a white male population, and we were on site where a group of riggers approached us to voice their concerns, and they also mentioned some health and work-life balance concerns. So we've taken on the review. The suppliers in that review have been fantastic. We worked with them, then they fed back into Amelia, and were very proactive and very forward-thinking in actually putting their crew forward and their freelance community forward to feed into this process. So we have taken, similar to the security review, we've taken some actions to make sure that we've got some minimum standards in place and trying to make sure that we can address some of the concerns specifically around motivation and, status. So making sure that actually people they feel appreciated, valued, making sure, like, simple things like making sure that when they turn up, they're expected, making sure they've got access to the toilets and opening the doors and that kind of thing, making sure that they feel like they can actually talk to the right people. For some weird reason, there was this historic thing about not being able to talk to venues. Actually, like, of course, please, you are our eyes and ears on the ground. We need you. Please do have that relationship with the venue and go direct. So there's please do go.
Well, I wanted to add that one of the things that came out of this, and other studies that I've done for the TV industry in other parts, is with the sort of rapid change of how things have happened and new technologies and so on, people have ended up quite siloed in what they do and not understanding the roles that other people play in making TV. And as a result, there are some roles that then people feel that nobody values what they do. And the rigger drivers was a really good example, because they do most of their work before anyone else is on site. Then when everyone else arrives, they're having their break because they've been driving and rigging for 12 hours and they're having a cup of tea. So people see them just sitting around having cups of tea, and then get them to do other things. And so they're always, being asked to haul camera equipment around and things like that. And then everybody leaves and they are left to de-rig and then drive home. And one of their things was...
Drive the truck and then drive
go home. Yes. But this sense that people don't understand what they do. And this is a theme I'm seeing. I've just done a piece of research on post-production, slightly less relevant for sports broadcasting, but again, people not understanding what that process involves. And therefore, when you make what you think is a quick decision at 5 p.m. on a Friday, how many people that affects, for how long. And that just seems to be a theme. And it seems to connect in, I think, with some of the changes in technology. And it might be a risk of having fewer people on site as well to think about mitigating, is there's even less understanding. So those who are out on site might feel even less appreciated by everyone who's back in a comfy studio. And it's just something worth considering, I think.
Yeah, so do you think out of all of the people that work in an outside broadcast, the riggers have the most undervalued job? Are there any others that we should be helping here and addressing?
Security.
Security.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the day, if I'm honest. I mean, yes, I think... I definitely think there's a point to be had about the rigger driver situation from so many areas as well, because we're short of them. They're not coming up the pipeline. I don't even think there's a huge concerted effort to try and train rigger drivers, but we are constantly short of C1 licensed people or HGV licensed people. Part of that is an economic crisis that we just can't solve on our own. Part of that is the fact that learning to drive is expensive, having a car is expensive, and it didn't used to be as expensive. It used to be much easier to become a 17, 18-year-old driver. You then have to have your license for at least 3 years before you can even apply for a C1 and then learn and train for that. So if you're getting a 22-year-old into your company who's actually keen on this, we're getting more and more people who already aren't driving at 25, 26, genuinely have never had a license. And it's not because they didn't need a license. It's not because I live in London, it's easy to take the tube. It's because it's way too expensive to own a car, so what's the point? Or getting the lessons with it. So you start to connect them with the right things, like Screen Skills has a bursary where people in the industry can access funding to all this. But by this stage, you've got years before they can be a trained rigger driver for the type of vehicles that you need to do. So you do have an issue there. Plus, they're undervalued, and they absolutely are. I mean, I think on any given day, any aspect will have a little moan about feeling undervalued. The OB operators, the engineers on site will always feel undervalued because their work, maybe they did an absolutely amazing job, all the pictures and sound and everything got out on scratch and everything like that, but maybe something else happened and they just weren't thanked for that. You know, it can happen quite readily, and we all have to get much better at making sure that everyone gets thanked. The warehouse operators, for example, absolutely at times will feel undervalued because they're back at base, making sure everything gets packed, making sure everything is right in the place. And I know that we ourselves have conversations going, that's not recognised as much as it could be. it's easy to see the big shiny jobs as being a little bit more valued, and now we can change that. But it's also, yeah, I think it's on any given day it could be a different person.
Yeah.
Who's
But technology doesn't really help us with this, does it?
No. I think that's a really, really interesting point to make, Ellie, actually. We can talk about this all within innovation and accessibility, and I really want to talk about some of the exciting things that we've been able to do, to hear about in terms of innovation within the industry to allow for more accessibility for that pool of talent that we need to grow. But ultimately, and speaking to Paminda and Morag's point, and Anne-Louise's point, is there are many, many, many areas of this where technology doesn't help.
It's
As
about
policy
people.
helps.
It still boils down to people.
Well, it's people, it's policy, and of course it's budgets. Because ultimately, I hate to say it, but you're still needing to actually filter the conversation up to the person who's actually setting the budget, so whether that's a broadcaster, or whether that's the rights dealer, whether that's the lowering advertising agency, but when you get to the point where we're at, and there is no more extra money to be had for an extra rig day so that they can have a much more comfortable rig setup, for an extra person on board to actually just make sure that the crew are getting timed breaks, for example. All of that stuff gets cut. And so you try very much to feed the conversation up to the right people, but, you know, that's why you kind of have to shout about it on a stage.
So if you're talking about cost, could technology manufacturers who have loads of dosh, could they start helping out in this area?
Well, I mean, I'll let you... I've been speaking too much, probably. But yes, I mean, I think there's a lot of technology companies, a lot of innovators who feed into this industry, who absolutely have the willingness and drive and desire, and actually they're all creators themselves. And sometimes it's just about being very, very clever to find the proof of concept, to find the funding package, to find who's going to help fund and give space and time to something like a proof of concept. So I know, for example, that EVS have had some sort of forays into doing touchscreen replay, for example, for anyone. And I think this started as an accessibility issue, but again, interestingly, it's not for that. Started off as a sort of, why can't someone with maybe one arm maybe do replays? Do you need to have two arms? And you're sitting there going, well, it's not so much for that. What if someone who's a freelancer breaks their arm in a car? They could, that's just them not earning for 6 weeks, but they could maybe earn for 6 weeks. So where do you find the funding to get EVS to make that worthwhile? You know, and it's the same with radio mics and audio companies and all of this sort of stuff for anyone with hearing impairments. Actually, we could get really quite innovative and excitable about all of this, and I think we are. We just need to find the right circle and funding package sometimes.
And unfortunately, everyone thinks about accessibility and thinks physical, right? So there's just so much that with when you become a TAP member, you have to do an audit of your own facilities. So you get somebody in to actually look at everything that you have, physical assets, your offices, your trucks, whatever. And there is so much that you can do that isn't about just getting somebody with a wheelchair into a space. It's actually about the neurodivergence, the lighting, the not using capitals in any of your paperwork or any of the signage, stuff like that actually isn't going to break the bank but has got an impact on those people that either you know or you don't know, but actually just makes their lives generally a bit better.
I was two examples that are just building on that. So one actually was, I think the BBC has developed some easy read call sheets for people with neurodivergence. They're just easier to read for everybody because call sheets are quite hard work.
So there's benefited a whole range of people, not just
they're really useful.
Yeah.
And then the second one is also thinking more broadly than just physical access and think of a positive one. The International Cricket Corporation Council. So they for a recent women's, I think it was the 2020 World Cup in the UAE. A lot of the female sports competitors experience quite a lot of online abuse. That's part of this. And they trialled an app called GoBubble, which screened their social media for them. And it was really successful, and they experienced a lot less abuse, a lot less stress. And they're now opening it up to male athletes as well, because it's not just female athletes that experience this, but it's also relevant for broadcasters. Anyone that's in the public eye who gets abuse as a result of being part of the sports world or any broadcasting. And that, I thought, was a really interesting trial of a piece of technology that tackles a specific problem that affects people with certain characteristics a lot more as well. So I think there are some really interesting examples.
It doesn't
out
have to
there.
cost the earth either.
Doesn't cost huge amounts.
In terms of your research and feedback, do you get positive feedback saying, actually, my working environment and I'm working in OB is absolutely fine?
No.
So interestingly, the people that I would think would have it worse, and I've been doing some research recently with cleaners, caterers, security guards and drivers. They have a lot to say, but one of the things I always ask them is, do you feel able to raise concerns? And the vast majority of them say, yep, I've got no problems to raise concerns, and they often do. But interestingly then, the freelancers working for broadcasters, when I ask the same question, they absolutely will not flag issues, and even not just freelancers. People are terrified. They think they'll be blacklisted. And I've come across issues where people have, cleaners and drivers and security have raised problems, and they're all happy to do so, and then it disappears somewhere at the unit manager level because people don't want to take things further.
As a freelance, I completely get that. I wouldn't. I would get in, do the job and leave and not complain.
Yeah, and why rock the boat further? And that is a real challenge, because then it's really hard to know, for someone like Joe, to actually get the information about what is happening on the ground. So from the broadcaster perspective, everything looks fine. And then I might go in and ask some questions, and I'm like, oh, actually, they've flagged quite a lot of things that are a problem. It's never got back.
And then we look at the questionnaire that went out recently from the Film and TV charity about the industry and hands up, it was very much high-end TV and film, right? So we know that the people that completed it, I think it was about 4,000 completed, and only about 150 were from a sport genre. And there's also an element of who actually answers these questionnaires. But anyway, we know that questionnaire came back, and 60% of the industry thought about leaving due to poor mental health, and 30% of the industry are leaving or have left. So we know that there is an issue around mental health. We know that there's an issue around retention. And so we have introduced the individual assistance plan to try and support the freelance community. So it mirrors exactly what Sky's employee assistance plan has, but it's available for the freelancers to give them access to legal debt and debt advice, and also counselling, that kind of stuff. Getting out there is quite a challenge, making sure the freelancers hear about it.
Know about it, yeah.
Because it's on a planning sheet and an email that's randomly sent out. So actually, a lot of them don't know, but we are trying to get it out there. But
it could be an app.
There is an app, but it's telling them about it. So we know that there are certain things that we should be doing. And
that's good news. That is good news. And that's a nice positive way to end this bit of discussion. But we do have time, have we, Heather, for a few questions? If anybody's... Anything the guys... Yeah, in the front row there.
I've got a sort of a question, cross-statement, but one of the challenges I'm experiencing when working in high-end TV is that casting crew won't come forward to disclose that they're either disabled, deaf, neurodivergent, or have health conditions that need to be addressed to do within the job. And every time I've done an access ride and talk through with people, it comes up time and time again that it's the first time they're having that conversation. And also that fear of disclosing and what information is disclosed. So I suppose it's a cross question between that understanding awareness, but what you do within the industry that can help face that big barrier head on.
That is a huge barrier, isn't it, Amelia?
That is absolutely, all the research I've ended up doing has found that people are afraid to disclose because they might be seen as less competent, or they might be seen as not coping. And that thing about, this is the first time anyone's asked about this, the project I mentioned at the beginning about inclusive security practices, when I was asking people, you know, what their experiences had been. And they said, the number of people that said, we've never had this conversation before, and it's actually really valuable. How to change it?
I think that's things like this, moments like this are how to change it, having these discussions. So that is something that you can then start to commit as an organisation to start doing, making sure that you're starting to have those conversations at the point of crewing, at the point of doing any of the logistics for these things. I think it's also, it's worth talking about having more of these sort of networking thing, you know, not necessarily boring panels like this, you know, where you will have to sit there before you can have a drink, but it's just networking opportunities, because I think if anyone from those communities could actually understand how we are not we are not privileged at the moment with choice, right? There is a skills shortage in huge areas of outside broadcast: audio engineering, vision engineering, broadcast engineering, multi-camera director, replay operators. We really need new talent, which is why it makes total and utter business sense to try and open up those pools of talents to areas where traditionally we wouldn't have looked before, which is where we want to use innovative technology, like using accessible adapters for comms for someone who's hard of hearing, so that they can actually have a more focused hearing during an SPFL game or a football game. And you, Alison, were the one who was talking to me once about, it was a first responder at the Westminster attacks who's deaf and who had an adapted piece from, was it Bluetooth or was it a connector?
It was connected, and it was the first responder on the Westminster Bridge who uses optical hearing aids and connects them direct to the two-way radio.
To the two-way radio?
To the control room, yeah. So he completely cut out the background noise that and the chaos that was going around, and he was in direct contact. And it was going straight into both hearing aids.
Yeah, so he had more focused hearing in an emergency situation like that. Now, obviously, we're not talking about first responders, but we are talking about big, noisy stadium environments. There's actually suddenly a benefit to having an adaptability to the comms systems that we're using to allow people with hearing impairments to actually be able to do those jobs. It all comes down to the need, though. We are not inundated with audio guarantees. We're not inundated with audio engineers. We need a bigger and wider pool of talent. So if anyone with accessibility issues who previously has been scared to disclose them, scared to disclose their medical issues, or, you know, it's about communicating to them now and making them feel confident that they are very, very needed and valued.
And also, so we are learning absolutely from other genres, right? So sport has been really poor in this area, and actually high-end TV and light entertainment has been asking for this information a lot more at the point of like booking, right? So you have those access coordinators, which we haven't done, and we're slowly learning as part of being a TAP associate member, and how we can actually make sure that we can learn from that side of the industry what they've done, and also like try and make it applicable to sport. But sport, we don't do diamond, right? So we don't actually disclose any of our diversity information. That doesn't work for our industry. So we actually don't know what our industry, how our industry identifies. So there is a couple of challenges, because I think we are quite new to this area, right?
What do you fix if you don't know what to fix?
And maybe the old, you can't be it if you can't see it. If the communities can see somebody else perhaps doing what they want to do that's similar to them, then maybe that mentoring or that advice is always useful. So
you then connect up with Rise, and you bring them up, and you make sure you're doing all that, but you use the big showcase events. So we've got the Commonwealth Games 26 coming up here. Now, we're as yet to know whether we're working with them or not, and we might not. But if we do, I'm already looking at case studies, proof of concepts. What can we do on that world stage to actually have these these innovative new technology pieces in to actually make all of this stuff a little bit more adaptable and a little bit easier to use. And we can use that as a so the Olympics is quite often used as that, and that's you've got to sort of use these big global moments to actually try.
Well, the Olympics used a kind of a big training program ahead of the interviews in the mixed zone. Only female camera operators in the mixed zones at every venue in the Olympics, just to train women up to become camera operators, and that was an opportunity to do that.
I love the big sporting events, but I also feel like we do a lot on the day-to-day, like the bread and butter, and so whenever I hear the BBC and the big sporting events, I'm like, no, but like we're also doing that on WSL for women's football. We've had a lot of the events there. We had being very high proportion of female staff, and we also do a lot on the cricket. Some of the cricket events, we also had showcase events where there's been a lot of female staff on that, and then that's fed into the other coverage. So there is absolutely a lot that we are doing, but we're not the best at shouting about it, and we're not the best at showcasing it to the other.
So you use the bigger global events to actually leverage that, I think, is the thing. I mean, we've actually had a sort of counter problem in that we really, really wanted to celebrate International Women's Day by having one of our Rugby Super League games down in the north of England fully female crew, and we failed. We had a 6-month lead time for it. We tried really, really hard to do it. We were ending up looking at bringing people across from Amsterdam, which of course was not sustainable, so we didn't do it. So actually the news story there is, no, we've got a way to go. We could do it 50%, slightly more than that, and every year if we can get 60%, 70%, 80%, absolutely great. We're nowhere near being able to crew 100% female. Certainly not within the geo-mapping that we're also, another technology that we're trying to use to make sure that we're being sustainable is making sure that we're actually sort of crewing from a local area. That's not happening. So I think just trying to improve on that and then use the big global events to actually do the sort of big proof of, because that's where you can get the investment. So if you can get someone to pay for a proof of concept, then you've got on the global stage, then you can do it at a later stage.
I just want to go back to Alison's question. Because so one of these things I think is about the message being, you raise this because it may be somebody else that actually will benefit from it as well. That it's not just about you as an individual, it's about you as a team. It might be, can you think of someone else who you might not know, imagine if you had a disability of some sort, what would you do to change things? And start to bring, in the human rights world, we talk about meaningful stakeholder engagement as being a requirement, and it really is about trying to encourage dialogue and people to talk about these things. It's not easy, though. I do recognise that. Oh, one thing I should add, though, on that note, if you're not aware, the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority is launching its new standards on Thursday. There are 4 standards for the creative industries. There's a safe workplace, an inclusive workplace, openness and accountability, and responsive learning, I think. And the idea is they will set the standards across the screen sectors, theatre and music. And there will also be a reporting mechanism, an independent one for people to report problems to. Relevant, I thought.
Yep, absolutely. Any more questions out there? It was quite an extensive answer to your question there, Alison, but yeah, we covered a lot of ground. Yeah, everyone needs a drink. Thank you very much to our panel, to Job, to Lucy, to Amelia. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening and get some chatting done, some networking. Thank you.
Thank you.